Well, South Africa's corruption bill for the last 20 years, conservatively estimated at 700 billion rand. Tomorrow, NGOs, religious groups, trade unions, they're expected to make a stand against the scourge of corruption with marches across the country, mostly focused on Pretoria and Parliament in Cape Town. But where is the voice of business in South Africa? This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight, I'm chatting to Paul Hoffman, who's director at the Institute for Accountability in Southern Africa, about why corporate South Africa is sticking its head in the sand. Would you agree with that statement, Paul Hoffman, that corporate South Africa is sticking its head in the sand on corruption?
Yes, Bruce, I think that it is clear that corporate South Africa is not coming to the party, and it's a little difficult to try and work out why. But I would guess that there are three reasons which affect different businessmen in different ways. You can look at the pragmatics of it, you can look at the cynicism of it, and you can look at the fear of it. And I think if we look at those who are pragmatic first, you'll get an idea that many people in business are practical people. They are driven by the profit motive, and to go and walk around in the streets on a day when there's a buck to be made doesn't seem to them to be a practical way of paying the bills and breaking even or achieving a profit in these hard economic times. If however you look at the cynics, they have no notion of idealism and no desire to improve the system, and in fact they cynically take advantage of the flaws in the system to the best of their ability, and are unlikely to be seen joining the left, because it is a left organized march in the marches on Parliament and the Union buildings tomorrow. The third group is the one that interests me most, which is the fearful group. The fear derives, I suppose, in part from our authoritarian history, where good people did not stand up and protest because it wasn't the done thing. But the other aspect of the fear is that a lot of people, especially in the mining sector, are concerned that if this anti-corruption campaign does take root and get traction, that practices such as transfer pricing are going to be re-examined, reconsidered, and moved from the realm of tax avoidance into the realm of tax evasion. And they don't want to do anything that does that, because they're in business, and that would disturb the bottom line of profitability in their organization. So different strokes for different folks, but pragmatically speaking, cynically viewed, or out of fear, it doesn't really pay the corporate sector to get too involved on a superficial level in tackling the scourge of corruption, which is doing so much damage to the fabric of society.
Now, you use the term superficial. Saki Machazoma, when I spoke to him about this recently, he, as a former activist turned politician, turned guy who ran public sector companies and into the private sector, Saki Machazoma described it as symbolic gestures. Business shouldn't participate in symbolic gestures. You call it superficial. How could business make its voice be heard more effectively than it is now? Because right now, one sticks one's head out the window and hears for a protest against corruption, and one doesn't hear very much when one talks to anybody in the business sector, at least on the record anyway.
Yes, no, that is a fundamental problem in the system. What is lacking at the moment is the political will to put in place the machinery of state that would be able to effectively and independently deal with the problems that corruption causes for us. And business takes the attitude that they do not have the clout, or they do not want to be seen to be standing up against a government which has allowed itself, if we look at the breaking news around Hitachi Power Africa, to be part of the corrupt system, a la arms deals and forthcoming nuclear deals. So business doesn't really see a role for itself, unfortunately, doesn't see a role for itself in creating the political will to put South Africa onto the high road to the future, in which our Bill of Rights will be properly implemented and we won't be losing billions of rand every year to fast cars, loose living and slow horses.
Slow horses, of course, being the biggest concern there. But when it comes to a sustainable environment, when companies go and look at King 3 and soon to be King 4, they look at global sustainability reporting, we look at the sustainability index of the JSE. Nowhere in there does it talk about the environment in which the companies operate. They talk about triple bottom line, they talk about stakeholders, they talk about all sorts of things, except the elephant in the room, which is bad policy making, dodgy politics, dodgy politicians and corruption both in the private and public sectors. Those are surely the biggest elephants in the room in South Africa today.
Yes, I think that you're quite right. You've put your finger on the elephant, which nobody really talks about in polite society because it's not the done thing. And a business in South Africa has an unfortunate history in that it was able to adapt itself to the apartheid regime in the old days, and it has seamlessly reinvented itself in a way that enables it to survive and thrive in an atmosphere which is really seriously toxic and could have the effect of creating a failed state if serious steps are not taken to address the amount of corruption that is at current levels being tolerated in the system. There's a culture of impunity abroad in a lot of people involved in procurement of goods and services for the state. There is a lack of public accountability and there's a lack of transparency. I mean, the whole nuclear build where figures of R1 trillion get thrown around is being done in secret and is being done on the basis that no price has yet been agreed on, although we have committed ourselves to getting involved in nuclear in a big way. It's a very unhealthy for the country scenario that we are facing, and it does need a change of political will that will bring about circumstances in which people will sit down and recognize that you can't expect a small unit in the police called the Hawks and the President's Tame Special Investigation Unit and a few other minor agencies around the country to have the necessary clout to deal with corruption effectively. The Constitutional Court has ruled on this already back in 2011 in the Glenister matter, where it identified 5 criteria that are necessary if you are going to effectively prevent and combat corruption. You need a specialized team, not a priority crimes unit, which is what we have at the moment. You need properly trained personnel. You need that personnel to be independent of political interference, guidance, if you like, from the executive branch of government. The executive must be out of the picture with your corruption machinery. You need your anti-corruption entity to be properly resourced with guaranteed funding that cannot be cut off by stepping on the oxygen tube or cutting off the petrol when they get onto the trail of the wrong people. And most importantly, if we look at the history with the Scorpions, you need to have security of tenure of office for the personnel in the anti-corruption entity.
But many people watching you
and
this
accountability
evening,
now, we've been punting an integrity commission under Chapter 9 of the Constitution to take its place between the Auditor General and the Public Protector as our premier anti-corruption entity in the country, to take on the big fish.
Now, for many people watching us this evening and listening to you this evening, Paul Hoffman, they're going to be quite despondent. They're going to be thinking, hold on a second, we had a system in place that was working effectively. The system was disabled for political and personal gain of key individuals in the country. Do we ever go back to a situation where there is a semblance of law, order and accountability?
It's a difficult process. The Constitutional Court has pointed us in the correct direction with its Glenister judgment and with its follow-up in the Helen Suzman Foundation Glenister litigation as well. But the big missing ingredient at the moment is the lack of political will to address corruption and this culture of entitlement and impunity which is abroad in the land. And the more people who stand up and allow themselves to be counted as being against corruption, and the more people who put their voices behind what we've been shouting for since 2011, which is an integrity commission, or what we call the Eagles, to replace the Hawks. We want eagles because they fly higher, see further, and go after bigger prey than hawks could ever do.
Paul Hoffman, I thank you so much for joining us this evening. It makes for depressing listening, but it is absolutely crucial that we have the conversation. Paul Hoffman is director at the Institute for Accountability in Southern Africa, joining us from Cape Town this evening. It is really interesting to look at the response of the corporate sector to the big march, which has been called by, as Paul Hoffman calls, the left of South Africa, the church groups, the religious groups, unions and others who have come together in this march against corruption. Now, you can't have the chief executive of the JSE and the chief executive of the banks linking arms as well in Nzima Vavi on Thursday. It's just not feasible for them to do so, because the very next day they will be negotiating for lower wages with the members that they went to the march with. One wonders how big the march is going to be. One wonders whether or not it'll fall on deaf ears. And if business was standing up and being counted more, as business has tried to be in the past but has got itself slapped down, would it make the slightest bit of difference in the current environment? Big questions. That is it for this evening. Thank you for watching The Moneymakers. Good night.